This is a sad, solemn day. Very sad and solemn. I never thought I would ever make this particular video, and it saddens me that I have to make this video. Noam Chomsky is absolutely wrong in his assessment of the 2020 election. I would even argue he was wrong in his assessment of the 2016 election. And he has sat here with Mehdi Hassan and has made somewhat of a hyperbolic, wildly hyperbolic, and honestly, for somebody of his intellectual caliber, somewhat of a shameful argument in his defense of voting for one Joe Biden. I'm going to make my point. I tried to get Noam Chomsky on the channel. Noam Chomsky told me to go fuck myself, but he will sit here with Mehdi Hassan. I feel some kind of way about that. I'm a little bitter. That doesn't add to my opinion one iota. You've heard my argument on this stuff. I'm going to let you hear Chomsky's, and I'm going to explain to you why Chomsky is wrong. Elections, believe it or not, go beyond just one election. Over the last 40, 50 years, you have done the exact same thing with voting yourself into the Democratic Party, and your policy priorities, for the most part, continuously get ignored. African Americans, Hispanics always wonder, why are they taking advantage of me? Why are they taking advantage of me? You vote 90% in their camp. It doesn't matter from the standpoint of what you want if you're voting 90%, because basically you have nowhere else to go. Until you deal with that very specific point of you have nowhere else to go, nothing ever gets accomplished from the standpoint of policy, and you would continue to be cowed by the Democratic Party. And by the way, you being terrified of the Republican Party, the Democratic Party was willing to crash and burn with Joe Biden or ripping it away from Sanders and doing the exact same thing with losing to Trump. Don't buy into this particular argument of you have nowhere else to go. You will continue to be cowed for the next 1,000 years. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you for the opportunity to do it. Love Noam Chomsky, so there's nothing personal with this at all. But I greatly disagree with this particular point of view, especially after the 2020 race and the way I assess the 2020 race, coming away from it, meaning from the standpoint of my takeaways. Is possible I'm wrong? Yes. By the same token, I would say the left has been wrong for the last 40 years also. So I would imagine it is time to do something different. This is not voting for no Republican or anything like that. And a vote for not voting for a Democrat is not the same thing as voting for Trump. That's absurd. If you vote for a Green Party, you vote for a Green Party because that's the person who you wanted. If you didn't vote for the Democrat, then that Democrat didn't do enough to get your vote. That's literally what that means. So this voter shaming nonsense, kick rocks with that. That didn't work in 2016, nor will it work in 2020. And I have to be honest, it's somewhat of a pathetic, weak position to take. Your candidate is not good enough, so you have to go and shame voters in order to vote for your shitty candidate. That's your candidate's job. Noam Chomsky is wrong here. And the argument that Noam Chomsky is making here is wildly hyperbolic, wildly hyperbolic. And it zeroes focus into the very narrow perspective of a singular individual election as opposed to trying to get something over the course of time regarding policy. Let's hear Chomsky. I'm going to let him make his argument, and we can talk about it after.
To get rid of the malignancy in the White House. What do you then make of this very boisterous, very online, never Biden movement that we're seeing from some on the left, from some former Bernie people, including his own former national press secretary, some left-wing social media stars? What do you make of the never Biden movement?
Well, it also brings up some memories. The early 30s in Germany, the Communist Party, following the Stalinist line at the time, took the position that everybody but us is a social fascist. So there's no difference between the Social Democrats and the Nazis. So therefore, we're not going to join with the Social Democrats to stop the Nazi plague. But we know where that led. Okay, there are many other cases like that, and I think we're seeing a rerun of it. So let's take the position, never Biden. I'm not going to vote for Biden. There is such a thing. There's a thing called arithmetic. debate a lot of things, but not arithmetic. Failure to vote for Biden in this election in a swing state amounts to voting for Trump. Takes one vote away from the opposition, same as adding one vote to Trump. So if you decide you want to vote for the destruction of organized human life on Earth, for the sharp increase in threat of nuclear war, for stuffing the judiciary with young lawyers who will make it impossible to do anything for a generation, then do it openly. Okay, so yeah, that's what I want. But that's the meaning of Never Biden.
That's actually not the meaning of Never Biden. Noam Chomsky is getting old. I don't mean that as a negative. I just mean that when people get older, they get tired. And in this case, I'm sorry, these arguments are tired. As a software engineer, what I can tell you is that null is a position, meaning not taking a position is a position. In the context of whether or not you vote for Trump or Biden, a Republican can say, well, not voting at all is effectively a vote for Biden because you didn't necessarily vote for Trump. This is this is a weird argument to make, as if lefties are owed Democrats are owed the vote from lefties. I think that's nonsense. If the person votes Democrat, they're a Democrat. If not, they're something else. If that Democrat didn't do what was necessary to get their vote, that's on the Democrat. Null, in this case, is a position. 1-0, null. You don't necessarily have to vote for a particular person. That is not the same thing as voting for Trump. Also, I think the worst of this is the Hitler reference. Trump's Hitler. What Noam Chomsky is not telling you here is that during the time of the era which he's talking about, where Hitler is taking power, communists and Nazis were fighting in the streets. You had a situation where a government was not necessarily based on this kind of democratic order, meaning for the most part, you've just had strongmen or kings in office. And so you had this kind of young republic where some people were openly saying we needed a strong man. Well, you had communists and Nazis, meaning two political parties. At the time, those political parties had more active wings, let's say military or paramilitary wings, were fighting in the streets. That's not our situation. Like, I'm sorry, I don't buy that line of argument that situation of Nazi Germany or heading into Nazi Germany is effectively the same situation to which we're in now. The argument that Donald Trump is Hitler, I'm sorry, I don't particularly buy. I don't. I think he's bad. I think he's horrible. I think the Republican Party is utterly and entirely atrocious. But I also believe that the Democratic Party and not having accountability in the Democratic Party allows them to slide to the right and deal with that point for the moment. Without having any level of accountability, the left, for the most part, abdicated any level of responsibility of ameliorating the concerns of the population itself. So the Democrats who say you have nowhere else to go, it would point to the Republican and lefties who had all of these policy things that they wanted. Medicare for all, dealing with environmental degradation, dealing with corporations, increasing taxes on all those things out the window. And the Democratic Party that for the most part was funded by the same oligarchs. So it was funding the Republican Party that basically had the same ideas as the Republican Party about the world with moderate variations between the two things. Well, that Democratic Party slid further to the right. Lefties abdicated all responsibility at all in holding the Democratic Party accountable, believing, well, these are the guys, these are the adults in the room, these are the guys that know how to win. They lost 1,100 seats all throughout the United States. And again, even when they won, they shifted the party and the country further to the right. My point here is that elections are not singular individual events, meaning in the same way that there was Bill Clinton or Al Gore or John Kerry or etc. They move on. If you're looking at this from the very specific instance and narrow focus of an election, you can get blinded to the fact that elections go over the course of time, meaning 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, etc., etc. Your plan and your argument from the standpoint of lefties need to be based on policies, not politicians. I firmly believe that. Because ultimately, anytime that you fold yourself into the Democratic Party, you have a party that just doesn't buy your priorities. You are fundamentally different than the party. If you look at what took place in 2020 and the way that party ideologically fell in line against Sanders and against all of his policy priorities, Joe Biden said, we have, 9 million people without employment insurance now. 20 something million people unemployed. Biden said, I will veto Medicare for all. Sanders comes to this empty-handed, despite the fact that he's winning all of these states and despite the fact he has tens of millions of people and won the policy debate. The argument here should not be for lefties to just fall in line. The argument should be for lefties to all line up on this notion of these are the policy demands that we are willing to accept. This is no longer a race to the bottom. There will be accountability in this political process. Until that, nothing changes. Meaning, I love Chomsky to death. On this, I think he's entirely wrong. And if Chomsky came onto the show, I would bully the shit out of him. So Chomsky, you're probably right for not coming onto the show. Love you to death, though. But on this, I think you're wrong. This is not Nazi Germany. I don't even buy the argument of Nazi Germany. I think that's somewhat of a specious argument. I'm making the very basic point that if you're looking from the standpoint of the left and what you want to get accomplished, if you're focusing on policy and you choose 4 or 5 policies that are popular and you argue in the millions, do your job. You will not get our support. You will not get our votes. We will make you lose. And when they come back after and say we lost because of this or because of that and because these lefties didn't vote for us, we say, goddamn right, and we will do it again. Imagine if you did that in 2016 for the moment. Hillary Clinton lost anyway. Imagine if you would have taken the position that we are not voting for her, and we are not voting for her en masse. And there are tens of millions of people who make that argument, we are not voting for her. Even if it's not tens of millions, it's millions in the areas to which you need that to take place. Hillary Clinton, again, lost. Anyway, they would have blamed you and you would have said, goddamn right, we did that. We want these policy positions. And if you don't follow these policy positions, we're going to make you lose. Again, Clinton lost. Anyway, but imagine the leverage from the standpoint of, okay, this is a credible organization or this is a credible demand that needs to be met. Otherwise, we could lose the support and we will lose this election again. It's the difference between taking a strong position on an issue versus a weak position on an issue with the context of time built into kind of your assessment. This gets you nothing. Sanders, not using the mob, gets you nothing. He's coming empty-handed with task force. Those don't mean anything. The left, at this point, unattached from Sanders, needs to start making policy demands in regards to what it wants and standing by those policy demands and refusing to have a race to the bottom and unaccountability in the political process. You want to know, right now, why your politicians in Washington, your Democrats, are so weak and ineffective. It's you. You want to know why in the middle of a crisis where you have all of these people unemployed and everything else, where the Democratic Party, if they stood for anything, will be knocking this shit to the moon in regards to what they're trying to push and why they're not doing that. It's you. You have learned over time that the norm, in this case, are the current Democrats that we have, these weak, ineffective, spineless invertebrates that can't defend you from the Republican Party, can't get elected. These are the Democrats that you end up with. These quote-unquote centrists that don't ameliorate the concerns of the nation, that turn people out of the political process because their expectations are so deadened in regards to what government can do. These are the people that do this. And we get accustomed to that, thinking that there's some level of normality in that. If you want to explain Joe Biden's win, I would point to that. This notion of normality and Sanders not challenging electability in more of a, if I'm being honest, dickish, pointed way. But that's kind of beyond the point at this point. From the standpoint of the left, and you're grappling to figure out what do you have left, you have each other. You were in that foxhole by yourself, backing and fighting for Sanders. And in the same way you were there, I would say that if you had a certain level of solidarity on this point of no, these are our policy demands, accept these demands or lose, that you, at some point, may get what you want, especially if you can accrue a large number of people around to your cause. Joe Biden was likely to lose this race anyway. I would argue that Joe Biden was plucked, not because he could win against Trump, but entirely because he could beat Sanders, which means that the Democratic Party cared more about beating your guy than they did about beating Bernie Sanders. That's the level to which they are willing to go. Also, they had no issue attacking you, people who they would actually need for that vote, meaning that's the level of disrespect and how low they regard you. I am making the point that if you are to get anything done in this political process, you need to have a larger context of time, and you need to have a larger context of this notion of movements, and focus more so on the policy ideas that you want. I don't care if you're Republican, Independent, or Democrat. You may be a Republican that says, yes, I want Medicare for all. And yes, I want an expansion of Social Security. I have a mom that needs it, and I myself need health care. Meaning, I don't care your political affiliation. I don't care your political party. What I care about are the very basic policy ideas that I want to get accomplished. And if you are on board for that, I would make the argument that that's where you stand in a solidarity of no until those particular policy demands get met, or at the very least until there's some level of compromise in those demands. As it stands, Biden offers nothing and wants everything from you. And that's the last thing you should give him. Like, share, subscribe. We have one super chat. Oh, we have two. Philip Church. It's funny that beating Trump is important enough for voters to betray their interests, but not enough for Biden to betray the donors and serve the voters. Biden can't even stop lying about Medicare for all. Philip Church, I agree with you. Think about that for the moment. If Biden came out and says, you know what, fuck it, I'm for Medicare for all, say it just like that, be on mainstream media, just fuck it, I want to get elected. I know Democrats put me in not necessarily because I could beat Trump, but because they thought I could just sop up the black vote. But screw that. I've been trying to be president my entire life. I've looked at this as a career goal. I want to be president. Fuck it. You want Medicare for all? I'm your guy. You need me to be the FDR? I'm your guy. And sells out immediately to the public. Do your job. Do your job. That's all I'm asking. And when I said do your job, I just mean, what are the things that the public wants? You lost the policy argument. And if your job really is to go and do the public's will, that's the public's will, buddy. This is kind of my point. The race to the bottom has made these guys entirely unaccountable to public will, because Democrats will put somebody in office not because of what they do, entirely because of who they're not. And with that particular process, where you entirely always gets this thing of, I just want to stop the Republicans, I just want to stop the Republicans, I just want to keep the monsters at bay, you never actually hold anybody accountable in that process. At some point, you need to start. I would make the argument you start now. Got to start somewhere. Biden is the one that takes the axe. At some point, if you want your policy priorities accomplished, this is where you start. I am more confident of that than anything else at this point. The electoral process is not that it doesn't work. It's that there's no accountability in the process. The public has been so deadened in their expectations that having somebody like Sanders, when they think, oh, wow, that stuff is risky, missing the point that Sanders is just an FDR Democrat. They don't even know. In their heads, that's not normal. Sanders making this basic argument that, yeah, we got Medicare for all. Yeah, we can pay for college and all of this other stuff. And now, all of a sudden, on a dime, they create trillions of dollars. The public's expectations have been so deadened that it doesn't necessarily believe that those things are doable, because those aren't necessarily things that government typically does. You need to start somewhere. And I would make the argument that if you're talking about a movement of people that can organize, it's not in party. Somebody may appropriate that stuff from within the context of a party and thereby drain away support from people who dissent in regards to no. But at that point, they're appropriating those particular policies, so I don't necessarily have a huge amount of issue with that. I'm making the point that we, or Sanders, is going empty-handed and expecting people to vote for Joe Biden. And I'm saying that if you're trying to get your policies accomplished, that's the last thing you should be doing. En masse, lefties need to be able to organize and say, no, this is what we want. And you're not getting our vote until you get it. Mark Alaya. I like that last name, Mark. Biden further paralyzes voters, and Bernie sent his momentum off a cliff pretty much. Imagine if he made that coalition with Ralph Nader and the squad. It makes me sad. Imagine for the moment if Bernie Sanders came out and said, look, I don't believe Joe Biden can beat Trump. And because I don't believe Joe Biden can beat Trump, I am terrified that Biden is going to lose this election. Because of such, in order for Biden to get my coalition and for me to be able to give him that coalition, I need him to accept Medicare for all and elimination of student debt. That's what I need. Now, you have some people who say that's not enough, but you will have some people say, okay, fair enough. But that's a compromise. But that's somebody who's coming trying to make a political deal in order to get a particular part of the coalition. Hillary Clinton didn't care about that. Joe Biden didn't care about that. But that's because for so long, over the last 40, 50 years, you have given them everything for nothing. This is the point that I'm trying to make to you. They're obstinate. It's everything to do with you. To some degree, not entirely them. They are only going by what they know because this is the normality in regards to the way we do politics. I'm saying that needs to stop. It needs to stop. Now, the person who they are putting up is cognitively damaged. And they are saying, like, this is the guy who they're saying, yeah, put that guy in office and give that guy the keys to the nuclear button. You wouldn't trust Biden with matches. But yeah, let's make him president.
That have to be done. There's during World War II, where Roosevelt came up with a thing that was totally different than the.
He's reading notes and still can't get it right. I don't care about Joe Biden's age. Clearly, I don't care about his age because Sanders is older than Joe Biden. I care about his capacity to do the job and whether or not he backs up the policies that not just I want, but the population wants. And my concern is, how do I get those policies? I don't believe in the noble loss. I think those are just losses. The person who actually won doesn't give a shit what you call it. I want to win. And what I want to win is from the standpoint of these are the policy proposals. And in those cases, there's a clearly defined win on whether or not those policy proposals get accomplished. It's kind of like the civil rights movement. It's like, what do you want to accomplish? Well, I want blacks to be able to do this, this, and this. Can they do this, this, and this? Yes. Does it mean that everything is great? No. Does it mean that those multiple goals were accomplished? Yes. I think about this in the same way, somewhat of a human rights movement. Basically, humanity, this country, coming together and saying we are no longer willing to accept politics as usual. And part of that is being willing to say, you don't get support. You don't get anything until these are your policy proposals. If that means that you lose, if that means that you no longer exist, then that's on you, because we're not the wrong ones for saying, go and do your job. Now, that's a different argument in regards to, okay, we're just going to acquiesce and never get what we want. And at some point, we're going to engage in politics and then lose and then still not get what we want. And then engage in politics and lose and still not get what we want. At what point does this process become repetitive and people wake up and say, okay, maybe this is not the way to do politics? The race to the bottom needs to stop. He didn't particularly like it when Amazon would go from place to place to place and dangle itself and say, hey, if you give me all of this money, I'll settle my business here. Then another state has to compete against another state. Amazon, multi-billion-dollar company, pays no taxes, would be able to go from one state to the next and get that state to give them all sorts of bonuses and tax credits and tax breaks and everything else, as opposed to all of the states just saying, yeah, we're not allowing that, meaning we're not allowing the race to the bottom. It's the same premise, almost in somewhat of a backwards way. I'm making the point that we allow this race to the bottom by not holding politicians accountable and not making an argument that this is what we want and you're not going to get our support without it. They, Democrats, continue to lose this argument of we're least worse. And you get to the point where it's so incremental in regards to the least worseness that it becomes no point in even voting for the Democrat. I understand you have Sam Cedar people who say he'd vote for a can of soup or one concentration camp less Sam Cedar, which is a very gross thing. I would imagine he would probably also agree with the argument that, hey, if Trump is accused of rape and Joe Biden is accused of rape, let's go with the rapists with the better policies. But think about whether or not you want that in your political space and why you even need to make the argument in that political space. And does that have to do with something with like 40, 50 years of just zero accountability? The answer is yes. Stop looking at this as a narrow context. I understand Trump is fucking horrible. I get that. But the guy who's willing to eat babies and kick puppies and that they told us was effectively the apocalypse, the Democratic Party was perfectly willing for him to win if it meant stopping you. If you don't believe me, when each and every one of those Democrats stood up and say, yes, we would rip this from Sanders at the end of a brokered convention, they understood that they would lose the election. It mattered less to them than stopping him and your policy priorities. I'm making the point that in a party that is willing to do that, you need on some level to be willing to do the same and have a little bit of courage in regards to dealing with your political affairs. You have abandoned the nation in regards to dealing with your main policy priorities of ameliorating the worst aspects of capitalism out of cowardice and fear. You have nowhere else to go, have cowed you until you get to the point of being able to put some kind of leverage and pressure on the political space, if not win, because that political pressure may actually be the pathway to you actually winning, as opposed to having a candidate with top down. Nothing changes. Love Chomsky to death, but I think Chomsky is wrong. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks, all.